Well, hello everybody, and welcome to our discussion on early childhood. There we go. Childhood we can divide into two stages, or we will in this class: early childhood, ages 3 years through kindergarten, and then middle childhood, which would be your elementary school years. And today we're going to focus on early childhood. And this is when a lot of unique human social cognitive skills are learned. Um, Children develop their complex ability to reflect on their own actions and the ability to read the mind of others, so not in a psychic sense, but to put yourself in someone else's shoes or to look at something from someone else's perspective. So what's happening during early childhood? First of all, we've got brain growth continuing by age 2. Most neurons have connected to other neurons and the synapses are therefore formed. The 2-year-old brain is about 75% of adult weight. Since most of the brain is present and functioning by age 2, really the frontal lobe is the part that's left to develop. So the frontal lobe is in the very front of your brain, makes sense given the name frontal lobe. And compared to other parts of the brain, the frontal lobe is on a delayed timetable. Frontal lobes continue to mature throughout childhood and adolescence. And what are our frontal lobes important for? Maybe you remember this from a biopsych class or an intro to psych class. But frontal lobes are really important for our ability to plan, to think through our choices, to inhibit, so to not go with our maybe the response that's we want to say or want to do, but we actually inhibit those responses so that we act in a socially appropriate way, right? For instance, if you're sitting in class with a bunch of people and maybe you're super bored, whatever the discussion is not interesting to you, even if inside you want to run around and scream like, this is so boring, stop talking, I can't take it anymore. You usually don't do that, hopefully. As a college student, your frontal lobes inhibit that behavior, and instead you just sit there and listen the best you can, right? Or after school, you may want to go hang out with friends and see a movie and this and that. But if you have a test, you it can inhibit those desires to do what you need to do, which would be study and do your homework. Well, especially in early childhood, frontal lobes are not nearly developed. Like we said, they develop by the time a child is in their early 20s. And we'll talk a lot about frontal lobes when we discuss adolescence. But this is why children don't really think through their actions. They just act. They do what they want to do. And this is why it's dangerous. Children might run out into the street without looking because their frontal lobes aren't there to help them think through the consequences. Little children will say anything, right? Even things that are embarrassing, they'll say them out loud, right? Like, why is that person wearing such an ugly shirt? Like, oh, you shouldn't really say that. But again, especially in early childhood, those frontal lobes are not yet developed. So children say what they want to say, do what they want to do, without having their frontal lobes to help kind of inhibit and plan their choices in a more appropriate way. Also, after infancy, a large increase in brain weight is due to myelination. That myelin sheath, that fatty coating over the axons that speeds signals between neurons and protects neurons, that's also continuing to occur in early childhood. What about physical development? Well, we see the cephalocaudal sequence. Bodies start to elongate and lengthen. Remember, their babies and infants' heads are very large compared to the rest of their body. And so now the rest of their body starts to elongate and lengthen. And then again, the idea of mass to specific sequence. By the time you're in middle childhood, a lot of their gross motor skills, walking, crawling, those kind of major body movements, they have mastered, or if not mastered, are getting pretty good at. And now they're working on the finer, more coordinated and precise motor movements, right? Like tying a shoe or learning how to write, things like that. And here we go, right? What gross motor skills are children developing, so they're working on, what are we doing? Walking, dancing, jumping, riding bikes, big motor movements. And then particularly as they're getting towards the end of early childhood, they're doing more fine motor skills. Oh, look, decorating delicious cupcakes, weaving, playing the piano, things like that. So from bigger motor movements to these finer motor skills. And we have it again here, gross motor skills, right? Large muscle movement. These improve dramatically during early childhood. A 2-year-old falls down a lot, bumps into each other, but by 5, they're pretty good with these motor skills. Kick a ball, ride a tricycle, skate, swim, ski. Adults have to really be careful in terms of safety, especially with urbanization and streets, with cars, swimming pools, right? Children have these amazing motor skills, but remember, they don't have the frontal lobes to keep them safe. So adults really need to be on the lookout, because a child can say, well, I know how to swim and jump into a swimming pool, or I know how to cross a street and walk across the street without thinking or that a car might come and hit them. So this is a really important time for parents to be very observant. In my years as a neuropsychologist, we always say parents need to be their children's frontal lobes, because they don't have really good development of the frontal lobes yet. And so it's really a parent's job to think, what could go wrong here? Where is there a danger, and how can I assure safety? There are others who believe that children need freedom to develop, that parents should actually step back and let environment be the third teacher. So instead of a parent constantly saying, don't do that, that's not safe, etc., that if a child, thinks they can run down a hill, but they fall because they're not quite that coordinated yet, then they'll learn from the environment that, I should be a little bit more careful running down a hill. That, however, is not my approach. I think we've got to really watch children as they are getting, so that we can help them not get into dangerous situations. Fine motor skills, again, those small coordinated muscles, they're harder to master than the gross motor skills. This is when children are learning writing, how to cut with a knife, drawing, buttoning a shirt, etc. They typically need both hands. When you think about these fine motor skills, you're often using 2 hands together. And so you need brain lateralization. You need both hemispheres of the brain to be working and communicating with each other. And that takes more time in terms of brain development. So skill milestones in terms of the motor area. At age 2, children are picking up small objects with the thumb and forefinger. That's a big step, when they start to not just pick things up kind of with their whole palm, but pick things up with a thumb and forefinger, feed themselves with a spoon, they're walking unassisted, they're rolling a ball. By age 3, perhaps printing their name, tossing a ball overhead. Age 4, cutting paper. Age 6, copying 2 short words, hopping on each foot, catching a ball, etc. So you can see there's quite a bit of motor progression during early childhood. Threats to physical development and physical skills. So if children aren't allowed to play outdoors, they don't develop their physical abilities as quickly as children who are allowed to play outdoors, or at least in an area where they have freedom to run around. Of course, this is an issue more in recent times with internet access, that children are more apt to stay inside and play video games as opposed to going out and playing ball and things like that, and high-tech educational toys. All of these keep children inside instead of allowing them to be outside, learning how to throw a ball, catch a ball, kick, ride a bike, etc. And of course, lack of food, undernutrition, as we talked about, can be a threat to physical skills, can lead to stunting or significantly impaired growth, impairment of fine and gross motor skills, and really being tired, right? Very fatigued if you're not eating enough. And that limits engagement in all activities, right? If a child is too tired due to lack of food, then they're not going out to play. It's harder to learn. It has a wide range of impacts. And as I said, this is actually kind of a dangerous time in terms of injuries. Between 2 and 6 years old, children are more seriously hurt than 6 to 10-year-olds. And why is that? Again, that immature frontal lobe or prefrontal cortex makes children very impulsive. They act without thinking, right? They do what they want to do without thinking about the consequences. And their motor skills are increasing dramatically. They're learning how to run, how to ride a bike, how to climb a tree without thinking that those things could be dangerous. And so this is the importance of injury control and harm reduction during this time. Of course, minor mishaps will happen and injury will happen. Children fall and scrape their knees and bump into things all the time. But it's really the parent's job to ensure that major, or at least to limit the chance of a major injury happening, right? By using car seats, bicycle helmets, safety caps on pill bottles, trying to fall, having children play on safety surfaces rather than concrete if possible. Even so, accidents happen. I will tell you, my daughter, we were looking for a new preschool for her. So she was 4 years old. We took a tour of the preschool and I was about to sign her up and she said she wanted to look at the playground. So I walked with her to the playground, which was made of that spongy kind of material you see at a park, like a spongy, rubbery material. There was a little bar that she was playing on that was maybe, I don't know, 2 or 3, probably 2 feet above the ground. It was not a high bar. And I was literally standing right next to her. She fell off the bar, hit that rubbery surface, and broke her elbow. So even watching a child all the time, injuries happen, and it's just our job as parents or caregivers to try our best to minimize the risk of that happening. Child maltreatment. Until 1960, we thought child maltreatment was a rare, often sudden attack by a stranger. But now we know it's not rare and that 92% of the time the perpetrator is a parent. So child maltreatment, that's all intentional harm to or avoidable endangerment to a child. And we can take child maltreatment and divide it into 2 categories of child abuse or child neglect. And child abuse is a deliberate action that's harmful to the child's physical, emotional, or sexual well-being. And then that's kind of what we think of when you think of the term child abuse, hurting the child in a physical way, a sexual way, or an emotional way. And then neglect is failure to meet the essential needs for the child. So not feeding the child enough, not caring for the child in an appropriate way would be neglect. So that's something that to be aware of, particularly working with children and looking for any potential signs of any type of child maltreatment. All right, cognitive development. There is a lot of cognitive development that happens during early childhood. And again, we're going to start with Piaget's theory of cognitive development, the idea that there's these stages that are universal, that all around the world children go through these same stages of cognitive development. And it really works on an inner timetable. This is the idea of biology, of nature, that as the brain develops, a child is able to do certain cognitive tasks. And before the brain develops to that extent, the child cannot do certain intellectual tasks. And so in this early childhood stage, we're in pre-operational thinking. If we're looking at Piaget's stages, we talked about sensory motor in infancy and toddlerhood. And in early childhood, we're in the pre-operational stage of thinking, about 2 to 7 years old. So in pre-operational thinking, in Piaget's theory, the characteristics that he notes is that the child has an inability to step back from his immediate perceptions and think conceptually. So children are really very focused on what's in front of them, what they can see. They can't think about a concept in a more abstract way. And that their thinking in terms of being a young child is really very unlike that of an adult. What else is happening? There's the development of language during this time and the use of symbols, that an object or a word could stand for something even if that thing is out of sight. Remember, we talked about object permanence, that in the sensory motor stage, children are developing object permanence, that when they're not seeing that thing still exists. And so children are learning that, and that you can use an object or a word to stand for something, for mom or dad or milk. Even if they're not looking right at the milk, they know that milk exists, and they could use that word to stand for that object. One of the areas that Piaget focused on in this stage was conservation, and that children do not yet understand conservation. And this is the knowledge that the amount of a given substance remains the same despite changes in its shape. And we're going to look at a video about this. He spent quite a lot of time, and this is sort of one of the key areas that Piaget is noted for. We said the child cannot reason logically, can't look beyond the appearance of objects. And young children, Piaget argues, really can only understand what they see. At this time, children are also, again in Piaget's theory, they use what we call egocentric thought. And that is, they view the world entirely from their own perspective. So they cannot take another person's perspective or see the world from anyone else's point of view. So for instance, their dad is just that, a dad. And they can't understand that daddy could also be someone else's brother or someone else's son, because that's not the role that that person plays in that child's life, right? Or what should we get mom for her birthday? I know, mom would like a toy car. Why would mom like a toy car? Because the child would like a toy car. So they see everything from their own perspective. So when we say egocentric thought, we're saying that it's from the child's own perspective, not that they're selfish, right? Sometimes you think about egocentric, selfish. That's not what we're saying in Piaget's view. It's just that they can only see things from their own vantage point. And so at this time, you see a lot of what we call parallel play, where maybe if there are two children playing together, they're each doing their own thing because they're only sort of seeing the situation from their perspective or what they want to do. They're not engaging in cooperative play, which we'll talk about as we see much more in middle childhood. So in terms of parallel play, if we've got Julie and Carol playing together, Julie says, I love my dolly. Her name is Tina. And Carol says, I'm going to color the sun yellow. And Julie, going back to her doll, says, she has long curly hair like my auntie. And Carol says, maybe I'll color the trees yellow too. And Julie says, I wonder what Tina's eyes are made of. And Carol says, I lost my orange crayon. And Julie says, I know her eyes are made of glass. So you can see, even though they're in the same room, probably right next to each other, they're doing parallel play. They're each doing their own thing. It just happens to be next to each other, like parallel lines. And we'll talk about cooperative play later. Conservation, so this is the idea, and we're going to watch a video, so I won't spend too much time here, but the idea that, and I'm going to use liquid, if a child sees that there are two cups that have equal amounts of water, and then you take one of those cups and pour it into, let's say, a long, wide bowl. And so now when you ask the child in this pre-operational stage of thinking, which cup has more water, they're going to say this one because the water's taller. They don't understand that when you pour this water in here, you knew the two had the same amount of water before, but now because this looks more like it's more, they'll say it's more. They're in this pre-operational stage of thinking. And here's the idea. We'll just watch the video and talk about it in a second.
New babies aren't quite sure what happens to objects when they leave their sight. Sky's mom keeps disappearing and reappearing. No wonder peekaboo is so much fun. During their first year, however, infants will learn an important concept: object permanence. Everything has a life of its own, even if it is out of sight.
At Maya's age, babies know to look for the object, but they might not have everything else straight. 10-month-old Simon is about to make a classic mistake. Although he watched us place the toy plane under the white cloth, he'll look for it where he last found it, not where he watched us hide it.
Can you look at these two glasses? Do you think that they have the same amount of juice? You think they have the same? Okay. Now we're going to pour this juice into this glass. Now, do you think that this glass has more juice, this glass has more juice, or do you think that they have the same amount?
That one has more.
This one has more, and why do you think that this one has more?
Because it's taller.
Okay, you ready? Yeah. Okay. Does this row have more quarters? Does this row have more quarters, or do they have the same?
1, 2, 3. Wait. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They're both the same.
They're the same?
5, 5.
Okay. Okay. Does this row have more quarters? Does this row have more, or do they have the same?
This one has more.
That one has more quarters?
Yeah.
Why does this row have more quarters?
Because it's more far away.
It's more far away?
Yeah, it's more far away than that. Looks like bigger.
Okay, this is my favorite one.
All right, we're going to play a game with the graham crackers, and we're going to share them between me and you, okay? Okay. Do you think that we shared those fairly?
No.
No, why not?
You have those and I have this one.
Well, what if we try this? Okay, can I put this down right there?
Okay.
Now is it fair?
Yeah.
Yeah, why is it fair now?
Because we both have two.
Can you tell me what you see when you look at that from where you're sitting? What are some of the things that you see?
And a cat.
A cat.
And a tree and a bone.
Okay, now we're going to do the same thing. Can you tell me what you see when you look at it from that stool?
An owl.
An owl?
And him.
What is that?
A goat.
A goat?
Yeah.
Okay, is there anything else you see?
Yeah, right there.
Right there, what is that?
A tree.
A tree.
Egocentric thinking.
Another little tree.
Another little tree?
Yeah, right.
Okay. And can you tell me what I see when I look at this from where I'm sitting right here?
Owl.
Okay.
And a goat.
Mm-hmm.
And a little tree. And that. And that.
Now, this will be the next stage in middle childhood, but I want you to see how different the thinking
So
is.
first we're going to look at these two cups right here. Do you think there's the same amount of juice in this glass as there is in that glass?
They're even.
They're even? Okay. So we're going to take the juice from this glass and pour it into this one right here. Okay, so now we're going to look at this glass and that one. So do you think that there's more juice in this glass, more juice in this glass, or do you think that they have the same amount?
Same amount.
Okay, why do you think that they have the same amount?
Just because this is skinny doesn't mean it's not the same amount. It has the same amount of juice in it, but this one is just wider and this one's skinnier, but they have the same amount of juice.
So, that was that idea of, oh, there we go, conservation, that children at this preoperational stage have not yet developed the idea of when you change the shape or the layout of two equal objects that they have the same amount. And you saw that egocentric thinking as well. Okay, so cute. Oh, I'm not sure why that happened. All right, so preoperational thought is thought to be impaired by a few things. The idea of reversibility inability. So at this stage, children do not understand that an operation can be reversed. They only think of it the way it is. So if you paint a room one color, they don't, and if they don't like the color, they don't understand, you can repaint it back to the color it was. This is why children can get so upset about their food if they say, I don't want lettuce on a sandwich, and they get a sandwich with lettuce on it, that you can take the lettuce off the sandwich and it will be fine. They don't understand that actions can yet be reversed. And centering inability, at this stage, children interpret things which hit their eye first, rather than looking at everything. So in terms of these conservation tasks that we were just looking at, they notice the height of the liquid first. Okay, well, this one must have more because the height of the liquid is more than in the other glass, without considering everything, without considering the width of the glass, etc. Also, in this preoperational stage, children have peculiar perceptions about people. They have an inability to grasp what's called identity constancy. That a person's core self stays the same despite changes in external appearance. This is why in early childhood, a scary mask is so scary. So even if it's dad and she sees dad put on a scary mask, it's so frightening because the children don't yet, in this stage, understand that dad is still under that scary mask. He hasn't changed his identity, right? And I remember this happening to myself when I was in maybe first grade, kindergarten. I can't remember, but early in my school years, in Halloween, my school had a haunted house, and someone was dressed up as some kind of scary monster, the lady who worked at the front desk. And I was so scared, crying, screaming, and she would take the mask off and I would see it was her, but I just was so upset. I couldn't understand that somehow the mask went back on, that it was still her. It was so frightening. And maybe some of you remember that in if you've been to Disneyland or some of these places with characters that are scary, or during Halloween when you were younger, those putting on a mask or something like that is so frightening for a little child, right? Other peculiar perceptions about people at this age: animism, the belief that inanimate objects are alive, right? Like the dolls in your room or the stuffed animals might be alive or come to life at night or something like that. And artificialism, the belief that humans make everything in nature, right? And so they'll say, Mommy, please make it stop raining. I don't like the rain. And as much as you say, I can't make it stop raining, young children believe that adults and humans can make everything happen, right? And you could think about when you were about 5 years old. Did you believe that things were alive, or have any of these kind of different beliefs? In terms of cognitive development, evaluating Piaget, some people believe that he minimized what young children know. To say that it's not until 7 years old that children are able to take another person's perspective or grasp that idea of conservation might be minimizing what children are able to do. Also an overstatement of the idea of egocentrism, that children are able to take other people's perspectives in a earlier and in a more advanced way than Piaget may have believed at the time. Again, the presence of early mind reading abilities, the ability to kind of be in someone else's viewpoint, and longer periods of animism, the idea that things might kind of have lives of their own, and certainly a lack of attention to cultural variations in the cognitive task or the conservation task performance. Piaget did not really look culturally at any of his cognitive theories. We can contrast Piaget's theory that cognition develops in stages and that it really is a nature phenomenon, a biology phenomenon, that the brain has to get to a certain stage before a child is able to do a certain task. And we could contrast that with Vygotsky, who was another researcher of cognition in children. But his belief is that we learn as children through an interpersonal process by the role of society and instructions by adults or more knowledgeable others. And that's really how we learn. And that cognitive development is a collaborative endeavor between a child and more knowledgeable mentors. And it's that people or the environment causes cognitive growth, that it's not so much nature, but more nurture. Right? And so these are theories. Different people believe different things, and there's research to support both. But in Vygotsky's view, cognitive development is embedded in a social context, that children are curious, they observe, they ask endless questions. If you've ever been around a young child, they're constantly asking questions, and that they need mentors. And those mentors can be parents, teachers, peers, older siblings. And those mentors present challenges to the child. They offer assistance without taking over the task, but they help them do the task, whatever it is, whether it's learning to tie your shoe or learning to ride a bike or something like that. They add crucial information that the child doesn't know, and they motivate the child along through this cognitive developmental process. So Vygotsky talks a lot about this zone of proximal development right here, the zone of proximal development. And the idea here is that a child has a current level of competence, what they're able to do. Let's think about language. A child's learning how to speak. Maybe they understand a few words, they don't really know much. And then there's a potential competence where they're able to get to. And then this zone of proximal development, this is where they have to get through this task to get to a next stage, let's say in language development or whatever it is that the child is learning. And during this learning process, learning occurs best when an adult creates instructions that matches the child's capacity. And this is the idea of scaffolding, that an adult uses scaffolding to promote independent performance. What is scaffolding? Well, if you think about a building, and as they're building a building, there's scaffolding around it. It's kind of like holding it up because it's not able to stand on its own yet. And then when the building is complete, they remove the scaffolding. That's my best understanding of the engineering of building a building. I don't really know much about that. But scaffolding in terms of learning is the same thing, right? If a child is learning language, young child, you're trying to teach them language, and so you're saying maybe the child is pointing to different things and they don't know the words yet. And so as a parent or a caregiver or an older sibling, you're putting the words. What do you want? Do you want milk? Do you want your toy? Do you want a nap? Oh, do you want a cracker? And then the child, nods their head. Yes. Yeah. And you go, oh, you want a cracker. So you're putting up the scaffolding. You're helping them get to that next stage. And eventually over time, the child will learn to be able to say, I want a cracker, right? And once the child has learned that, has come up to that new competency level, you remove the scaffolding, right? As a 12-year-old, parents aren't having to say, what do you want? Do you want a juice? Do you want a milk? Do you want a cracker? Right? We've removed the scaffolding and the child is able to do or ask whatever they want to ask for. And so the idea here is that learning is a bidirectional learning experience where a mentor is kind of guiding the child, and the child's responses guide and teach the mentor in their own way. So it really is a collaborative experience. In terms of becoming an effective, having an effective culture in our teaching-oriented society, what do we want to do? We want to foster secure attachments between the child and the caregivers. We want to break cognitive tasks into smaller, more manageable steps so the child can master each small step. If you present a young child with a large, overwhelming task, they're not going to be able to do it, right? If in the morning you say, I just want you to get dressed in the morning, get yourself ready in the morning and come downstairs ready for school. Well, that's too much for a 4-year-old. But if you break that into steps, okay, first I want you to go brush your teeth and tell me when you've done that. Okay, now I want you to go get your clothes on and then come tell me when you've done that. Now I want you to come down and eat some breakfast, right? Break it down, then the child's more able to successfully complete the task. And then continue helping until the child has mastered the concept and then move on. All right, social development. Well, that's all about play when you're a child. And we say play is the work of early childhood, right? As you get to be an adult, you have to go to work. When you're a child, you have to play. It's how children learn in so many ways. And there's different types of play: exercise play, running and chasing each other, exercising their physical skills. There's rough and tumble play, excited, shoving, wrestling. We see a lot more rough and tumble play biologically built into males. There's also pretending or fantasy play. The beginning of pretending play emerges in later infancy, toddlerhood. Maybe they start to play a little bit of dress up or a little bit of they're grown up or something like that. And then this collaborative pretend play starts around 4, 5, 6 years old, depending on the child, involves fantasizing together with another child, and can continue until early adolescence, right? Let's both dress up and pretend we're playing house, or pretend we're playing school, or pretend we're playing office. Maybe you guys remember playing something like that when you were a child with a sibling or a friend. Pretending is really important. It certainly allows practice in whatever the adult role is, right? They've learned about some adult role by watching a parent, a caregiver, a teacher from television. And so they practice. It allows them a sense of control. Children have very little control over what happens to them, but in their pretend worlds, they have all the control over everything. And it furthers their understanding of social norms. Oh, this is a cute video. We're going to talk about emotional regulation being very important at this stage, learning how to regulate what you want and not necessarily need everything right away. So let's go ahead and watch this video.
What can a marshmallow tell you about your kids? You might be surprised.
Psychologists at Stanford found that kids who could hold off eating one of these did better, get your hands off, did better at school and in life. So we set up our own marshmallow test to see what would happen and what parents can learn about teaching our children self-control.
Okay.
What is that?
It's a marshmallow.
But it's not just a marshmallow.
Do you like marshmallows?
Yeah.
It's what's going to make the next 15 minutes feel like 15 hours for the kids at the Edina Family Center.
You can either eat this marshmallow now.
I made that marshmallow now.
Well, just let me tell you what the deal is. So you can either eat it now or wait until we come back and you'll get 2.
I want 2.
Dr. David Walsh is a big fan of the original marshmallow test research. He wrote about it in his book, No, Why Kids of All Ages Need to Hear It and Ways Parents Can Say It.
The genius of the experiment, however, was that they followed those children for 18 years. And Amelia, the ability to wait for the second marshmallow was an amazingly strong predictor of their success in school, their adjustment, their happiness, even their popularity.
What does it mean when a child does eat the marshmallow?
You know, we're not predicting that any of these kids are going to be either good at self-discipline or not. What we really want to do is help parents try to figure out how can we help our kids develop more self-discipline, because we do know from a ton of research that that is a key success factor for kids, the ability to say no to themselves.
Hi, Lily. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
Lily gets the deal right away.
When I come back, what am I going to have?
Another
marshmallow.
In a room with few distractions, she waits and waits and waits.
15 minutes is a long time
It
for a
is. It's a
child.
very long time for a 4-year-old. 15 minutes is a real long time.
In the next room, Lily's mom watches with Dr. Walsh.
Surprised she's lasted this long. It's coming up on dinner time.
Lily surprises her mom and even herself.
And I smelled the marshmallow. I thought I would eat it.
So
I
cute.
didn't.
Should I give you another marshmallow?
Yeah.
Absolutely, because that was the deal. Okay, very good.
He gave me 2 marshmallows.
Of the 11 kids who took part, 4 ate the marshmallow within the first minute. Among them, 3.5-year-old Casey.
Your mom and I are going to go on a errand now. You can either eat one or wait.
I'm not eat one, okay?
That's whatever you decide is fine. Okay, very good.
Casey kept his word.
Bye-bye, buddy.
I'm not eating. I'm not eating.
11 seconds later, the marshmallow is history. Now it's his twin brother Nathan's turn.
So you can either have 1 or
2.
2.
It looks like Nathan wants to have his marshmallow and eat it too.
I didn't think you'd play with it this much.
For 15 minutes, he touches and licks the marshmallow. He even holds it inside his mouth.
Yeah, what does
Very creative.
Exactly mean? Now, I didn't really bite into it.
define eat?
It's tempting to keep watching these kids with the marshmallow, but that's not what this story is really about. So what can parents do to help their kids develop self-discipline?
It's the kid's job to push against the limits. It's our job to set the limits.
So we have to be consistent then, because if we're
Absolutely
saying this
important.
is, you do this, then this is what's going to happen.
Exactly.
And once you don't do that and you don't follow through, then it's
Then
like
they learn the
starting
lesson.
over again, right?
Exactly. Or if I say, no, you can't have the candy bar, and then 10 seconds later I'm giving them the candy bar, what they're learning is no doesn't mean no. No just means escalate, and I'll get what I want.
It's simple, but not easy.
Prior generations had a culture that supported the message of no. What's difficult today is that we have a culture that undermines the message. We have a culture that says more, fast, easy, fun.
A culture that says, eat the marshmallow.
The short-term relief of giving kids what they want, we pay a long-term price for that.
Turns out the agony of waiting for the marshmallow or a computer game or a car might actually help your child.
We all know that life does deal challenge, frustration, and disappointment. Well, we want our kids to be able to handle that. Well, how will they be able to handle that if they don't get practice?
Dr. Walsh says,
Come back
in
with
the
another
marshmallow
one.
test and in life,
I waited.
You did wait, didn't you? And now
good things come to those who can wait.
Language development. Language is developing quite a lot during early childhood. So language is a communication of information through symbols according to semantic rules. Language starts as babble in infancy, just meaningless sounds made by children from about 3 months to a year. Children start to produce short words at around 1 year, mama, dada, ball, cup, things like that. About 50 words, children know about 50 words by 2 years old and 200 words by about 2.5 years old. And you'll start seeing short sentences. And this is that time we call the word burst, where they're learning new words every single day. Starting at age 2, we have this telegraphic speech, first sentences that start to convey meaning without the use of unnecessary words. So a 2-year-old isn't going to say, Mom, I was really curious if the milk is hot, but they'll say, milk hot? ? question, right? You understand what they're trying to say without all those extra words. By 3 years old, you start to see plurals, use of plurals and past tense, but you still see a lot of errors. English is definitely a difficult language to learn, and so you see a lot of very cute errors as children are learning language. Just to go down the structure of language with these examples, because sometimes these terms can be confusing. Phonemes are the language sounds that make up words. So while she's eating her bananas, baby Rachel says mum, mum, ma. Those just the beginning sounds that will start to make up a word at some point. Morphemes, these are the smallest meaningful unit of words. So it could be the ending ing or a beginning un, or the beginnings of a word. So Rachel's first word was milk, which her parents understood referred to her favorite drink, milk. A morpheme is just a small, meaningful unit of language. Syntax, that's the arrangement of words to form appropriate sentences. Grammar, hard for children to understand. This takes some time. Rachel yelled upstairs to her mother, "Throw me downstairs the broom," right? That's not proper syntax. We would need to say, "Throw the broom downstairs," or something like that. So it's the word order. It's how we put words together in English following our syntax. Semantics is the meaning connected to words, right? As a family reunion, Rachel struggles in sorting first cousins from second cousins, not understanding what those words mean. That's the semantics. Prosody is the quality of speech that imparts meaning by intonation, pitch, and stress. This is when you use different tones of voice to mean different things, right? When Rachel speaks, if she puts equal stress on all the syllables and sounds somewhat robotic, that's a lack of prosody, right? And prosody gives us our speech a lot of meaning and can totally change the meaning of what you're saying. So if someone says to you, "That's a nice shirt," versus, "That's a nice shirt," right? It's the same words, but because of the difference in tone of voice, it means something very different. Overgeneralization, this is the application of a grammatical rule, and that's the key, of a grammatical rule in a situation in which it does not apply. So like rules for past tense or plurals. Again, in English, there's so many exceptions to the rule. We see a lot of overgeneralizations. So Rachel enthusiastically said, all of them goed to the zoo, because typically when you add ed, that turns it into past tense, but goed to the zoo is not correct. So there's an overgeneralization of that past tense rule. And an over or under extension, this is a common mistake while learning language where verbal labels are applied too broadly or too narrowly. So when a mouse runs across the kitchen floor, Rachel screams doggy. Remember, she understands that something furry with 4 legs is a dog, so even though it's a mouse, she's going to call it a doggy. Making sense of others' minds. This is starting to happen during this time, the theory of mind. This is the understanding that people have different beliefs and perspectives from your own. Starts to emerge around 4 or 5 years old. Researchers use this false belief study and again, they showed that Piaget's belief about preoperational egocentrism had flaws and that children may understand others' perspectives earlier than Piaget thought. But nonetheless, it's starting to develop during this stage, right? So here we have adult and a child watch while you hide a toy. And then the other adult leaves the room. And then they take the toy, this adult takes the toy from the drawer where he hid it and put it under the bed. And then the question is, where will the woman think the doll or the toy is, right? If you're taking this woman's perspective, well, she thinks it's in the drawer because that's what she saw. But if a child hasn't quite figured out the theory of mind yet, they're going to say, oh, she'll think it's under the bed because the child, through the task, has learned that the toy is now hidden under the bed. And that develops during this stage. Watch another little video on theory of mind here.
Do you like sweets? I thought you might. I'll get some sweets out. We're going to play a hiding game. I'm going to hide the sweetie in one of my hands, and you have to see if you can guess where it is. Okay? Which hand is it in? Yay!
These children are being shown a simple game of hide the candy. They all quickly understand the game.
Yay! Yay! Well done!
But when it's the children's turn to hide the candy, they divide into two groups. There are those that can do it, the older ones.
Yay! Oh, I got it! If you hide the sweet, so...
And those that just can't get it.
And I'll try and guess where it is. So you hide it up.
Before they are 3, these children are simply unable to imagine what their opponent can or can't see. So they are hopeless when playing this simple game of deception.
Yay! That's it. Now, really? Hide it up. That one.
But as their brain develops, they too will acquire this new instinct for smart competition. Soon, they will be able to see into the mind of their opponent and hold their own in a battle of wits.
Pretty cute, huh?
It's in that hand.
All right, so differences in the development of theory of mind. How do we get children who develop theory of mind earlier, having older siblings, advanced intellectual development, and we even see this more in bilingual preschoolers because they have to figure out what language do they need to speak depending on who the audience is. So that's really, or who they're speaking to, that's really sort of practicing the idea of theory of mind. Later development of theory of mind we see in children with frontal lobe damage, as well as children diagnosed with autism. And so we will just briefly talk about autism here. This is a diagnosis, a developmental disability that impairs children's ability to communicate and relate to others. Now, autism occurs on a spectrum from very mild to very severe. But the main symptom is the inability to relate to others. And so children diagnosed with autism show social isolation. As infants, they usually don't demand attention, which is pretty different than infants who do not have autism. If you're around an infant, they typically want to be held, they want to be cuddled and all of that. And children with autism, very often parents will say, yeah, my child doesn't really want to be held. They're happier just laying on the crib or on the couch rather than being cuddled or touched. And sometimes they'll even kind of push away when an adult tries to hold them. They don't want personal contact. They don't want hugs and pats on the back and high fives and things like that. We see deficits in theory of mind, and it comes, like I said, in a range of severity in terms of the diagnosis. In terms of the criteria to be diagnosed with autism, we use the DSM. This is a Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. Different versions. This is the DSM-5, 5th edition criteria. And so this is a manual that basically lists all of the different psychological disorders. Schizophrenia, depression, autism is in there. And the criteria clearly lists out what a child needs to show, the symptoms a child needs to show in order to be diagnosed with autism. And so in this case, you would see impairments in social communication and social interactions. So it can be difficulties in language, body language, understanding social norms of conversation, eye contact, things like that, and the presence of what we call restricted repetitive behaviors. So children with autism have to show these restricted repetitive behaviors. It can be things like rocking back and forth, twirling around, doing kind of the same action over and over again for no real reason, right? Taking a toy car and just going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, not really playing with it like pretend play with a car, but just having it go back and forth over and over again. And then you specify that the child does or does not have intellectual impairment based on an intelligence test, and with or without language impairment. So many children diagnosed with autism never develop language. Some do, but they have limited language. We see often something called echolalia. That is when a child basically parrots back to you what you're saying to them. So you say, "Hi, how are you?" And they say, "Hi, how are you?" So they do have language, but it's not really meaningful language. And it can happen later in the day. So if someone said to them, "Hi, how are you?" then maybe at night before the child goes to bed, they say, "Hi, how are you?" So it doesn't have to be right after. And then some children don't have any language impairments at all. What are the causes of autism? Well, it may have a genetic cause. We do see that autism tends to run in families, but there probably are environmental risk factors. We're looking at this. There's much going on right now on autism. And then treatments. We don't have any way to cure autism. Sometimes children will take a medication if they're very aggressive, perhaps, or very anxious. Maybe they'll take medications for those symptoms. We don't really have a medication for autism. What we do is use applied behavioral analysis, or ABA, and this is when you try to teach a child using positive rewards, using positive reinforcement to do certain behaviors. And then in some children diagnosed with autism, we see savant skills. Now, this is not common. Typically, children with autism have language impairments, have intellectual impairments. They're socially isolated. They don't really want to be with other people. We say they're kind of in their own world. It's a very difficult disorder for children and for their caregivers. But in some children, we see these savant skills, which are these amazing skills, not just good, not just average, not just really good, but actually unbelievably amazing, better than most people in the world. So things like a memory that is just unbelievable, or being able to do a calculation of like square roots of, something with 10 digits and then saying, what's the square root of that? And they can do that in their head. Or savants in terms of music or artistic ability. Now, this is not very common. Many, many years ago now, there was a movie called Rain Man about an adult with autism, had a savant skill in terms of calculations. And so it sort of became thought that all individuals with autism have these savant abilities. Now, that is not true. It is extremely, extremely rare and uncommon. Nonetheless, it does happen, and nobody knows why. That is a question as to why these two things go together, this diagnosis of autism, along with some individuals having these savant skills. And so I do want to show you this last video about one individual, pretty famous, who has an artistic savant ability. So we'll go ahead and watch.
Stephen Wiltshire from London is a star among savants. His nickname is the Living Camera. Stephen is autistic. He lives in a world of his own. Communication is difficult for him. He didn't speak his first words, pencil and paper, until he was 5. Yet when he was 11, he drew a perfect aerial view of London after only one helicopter ride. Even the number of windows in all the major buildings in his drawing was correct. For this film, we're testing the Living Camera in Rome. Stephen has never seen the Eternal City from above before. After only a 45-minute helicopter flight, we'll ask him to draw a 5.5-yard panoramic picture of the historic city centre. Without having a second glance at it, Stephen has 3 days. In these 3 days, Stephen will have to keep thousands of details in his head. The innumerable cupolas, the tiny winding streets, all the balconies and windows of the endless array of houses, and each and every column and window arch of Rome's major sites, from the Pantheon to St. Peter's to the Colosseum. Stephen has never trained for this feat of magic. The miracle simply happened when he first started to draw. Yet none of us would have bet that Stephen would be able to draw Rome just from memory. 5.5 yards of paper can look scarily empty. The amazing thing, Stephen starts the drawing as we would, with the Church of St. Peter's. But he doesn't do any sketches, nor roughing out of the space for the drawing. It's as if the panorama already existed within his head, with all the proportions, all the roads, all the details. A little miracle. At the end of the second day, Stephen is a good halfway through his creation. After 3 days of his drawing marathon, even Stephen Wiltshire starts to tire. He has filled in more than 5 yards of paper in fine pencil. He has been restlessly aligning window to window and house to house, because Stephen loves to be applauded for his art. In the left corner, he's finally reached the ruins of the Forum Romanum. Stephen's sister Annette is rejoicing with him. He's made it. Obviously, he's pleased with his work. Yet our vexing question still remains. How precise was Stephen's ability to memorize? Is it really true that you could only see a single curve of the Tiber from above? We started to compare the accuracy of the drawing with the real thing. Is Stephen's version of St. Peter's cupola too dominant? Yet here again, like with the curve of the Tiber, Stephen is frighteningly right. We wondered if the famous Roman hill should probably stand out more in Stephen's panorama. But again, Stephen had seen it better. From 1,000 feet up, the hills are, optically, almost level. Checking the Pantheon, we did discover some minor inaccuracies on the roof. But the number of columns of the portal is, again, absolutely correct. And, despite our doubts, Stephen has drawn one of the most complex buildings, the Colosseum, so precisely, it's practically a blueprint of reality. Stephen was also accurate in the instances we checked of nameless buildings and side streets. Had he had more time, his sister Annette believes, he would have put in even more detail.
Some of the areas of all of that part, lots of detail, remembered things of the some of the cities and the neighborhoods and the villages. And then the easy part is St. Peter's and Forum and the Colosseum.
Pretty amazing, right? To say the Colosseum is the easy part. So as you can say, that's an amazing savant ability. You can see a little bit of difficulties with language, but nonetheless this amazing, incredible artistic ability. All right, thank you very much.